Let's dive right into today's explainer. We're traveling way, way back in time to meet literally the very first family to ever walk the earth. So buckle up, because we're going to talk about some big choices, huge emotions, and honestly, how the whole world got its start. This isn't just some dusty history lesson, it is a thrilling, living story.
But before we really get going, I've got a quick question for you. Have you ever had a really hard time getting along with a brother, a sister, or maybe just a really good friend? You know that feeling, right? Well, keep that in the back of your mind, because today's story is all about the world's very first brothers, Cain and Abel. And let me tell you, things get pretty intense. We're going to see how their choices kind of set off this massive chain reaction.
So meet Eve's two sons. On one side, we've got Cain. He was a farmer, someone who loved working the dirt with his own bare hands, and he brought a gift of freshly grown fruits and veggies to Adonai. Then, on the flip side, is his brother Abel. Now, Abel was a shepherd. He loved taking care of his fluffy sheep, and he brought the absolute best of his flock as his gift. So two brothers, two totally different jobs, and two totally different gifts.
But, well, here's where things take a turn. Adonai accepted Abel's gift, but he didn't accept Cain's. Now, we don't know exactly why that is, but we definitely know how Cain felt about it. He got incredibly angry. His face literally fell. Imagine that hot, bubbling feeling of total disappointment and jealousy just completely taking over inside. It's a huge, overwhelming emotion, and Cain, well, he was letting it win.
Now, Adonai actually saw Cain's anger and gave him this really powerful warning. He basically said, "Why are you so angry? Why is your face so sad? Sin is crouching at the door like a monster, and it wants to grab you, but you can rule over it." This is such an awesome reminder for us too. Even when we feel super mad or jealous, we hold the key, We have the power to control our big feelings instead of letting them control us.
Sadly, Cain didn't listen to that warning. He let that angry monster completely take over, and our story takes a very, very dark turn here. Cain went out into the field with his brother, made a terrible choice, and he turned on Abel and killed him. It's literally the very first time someone loses their life, and the whole world suddenly felt incredibly heavy and dark. Right after this, Adonai came to Cain and asked a pretty simple question. "Where is Abel, your brother?" And Cain, he actually tried to hide what he did. He looked right back, basically crossed his arms, and said, "I don't know, am I my brother's guardian?" Like he pretended he wasn't even responsible for his own family. But of course, nothing is hidden. Adonai tells Cain that the voice of his brother's blood is actually crying out from the very ground.
Because of this terrible choice, Cain faced some really tough consequences. First off, the ground would no longer grow food for him, so his days as a successful farmer? Totally over. And it gets worse. He had to leave his home. He had to pack up and become a fugitive, basically a wanderer, endlessly walking the earth. Cain actually cried out that this punishment was just too huge, terrified that someone out in the wild was going to hurt him.
But, here is where we actually see something beautiful. Even in the middle of this really harsh punishment, Adonai showed mercy. When Cain was terrified, Adonai promised that no one would be allowed to hurt him. He promised a protection of sevenfold vengeance, and he even put a special protective sign on Cain before he walked away. It just goes to show that even when terrible mistakes are made, there's still this boundary of protection.
So Cain left his home and traveled east of Eden until he finally settled in a land called Nod. Now, here's a crazy fact about that. The word Nod literally means wandering. So his punishment basically became the actual name of his new home. He was living out his consequence every single day in the land of wandering.
But hey, life kept going. And despite everything that just happened, there is new life to celebrate. Cain started a family and had a baby boy named Enoch. And instead of just wandering around forever, Cain actually grabbed some tools and built a city, the very first city ever recorded in our story. He proudly named it after his son, Enoch. The world is really starting to grow and fill up now. I mean, just think about how fast the world is growing. Generation after generation, the family tree just gets bigger and bigger. We go from Enoch to Irad to Meshuyael to Metushael, all the way down to a guy named Lamech. There are so many people now, and this family line is about to invent some absolutely amazing things for human history.
So Lamech had these incredibly creative kids who practically invented the ancient world. One son, Hevel, basically invented camping, like living in cool tents with animals. His brother, Yuval, he was the very first musician, figuring out how to play the flute and the lyre. And then there's Cain. He was this master builder, forging hot brass and iron to make the very first tools. Tents, music, and metalworking. How cool is that?
But along with all these cool new inventions, a dark side was kinda growing too. Lamech actually wrote this boastful poem to his wives, basically bragging about being a bully. Listen to this. I killed a man for wounding me. If Cain is avenged sevenfold, then Lamech 77-fold. Instead of learning from the past, he was out here bragging about being violent.
77. Remember, Adonai had promised a protection of 7 for Cain as this amazing act of kindness. But Lamech completely twisted that number into a giant, arrogant threat of 77. So people were getting smarter, making better tools, creating music, but sadly, their hearts were getting harder and a lot angrier at the exact same time.
But don't worry, our story definitely doesn't end in the dark. Adam and Eve, who were obviously so sad about losing Abel, were blessed with a brand new baby boy. Eve named him Shet, which actually means granted, because God had granted her a new son. It's this incredibly beautiful moment of restoration, bringing hope, light, and just pure joy right back into the center of the family.
And that hope just continued to blossom. Shet grew up and had his own son, who he named Enosh. And the story tells us something incredibly special happened right around then. That is when people began to call on the name of Adonai. So alongside all the new cities, the music, and the metal tools, people were finally looking up, connecting with their Creator, and really filling the world with light again.
So, as we wrap up this explainer about the very first family, we've really seen it all. From Cain's angry monster, to the first awesome inventions, all the way to a hopeful new beginning. But before we go, I want to leave you with this one question. As you grow up and the world grows around you, how will you choose to treat your siblings and your friends? Will you let anger rule, or will you choose the path of hope and love? Think about that for a bit, and I'll see you next time.